On the 10th of July 1998, 16-year-old Kamiyah Mobley gave birth to a daughter at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida. She named the baby Kamiyah. Although Kamiyah faced difficult circumstances in her own life, the arrival of her first child represented hope for a better future. She viewed Kamiyah's birth as an opportunity to change direction and create a more stable life for herself and her newborn daughter. Not long after the birth, a woman wearing medical scrubs entered room 328 and introduced herself as a nurse. To Kamiyah, the woman appeared to be a hospital employee carrying out routine duties. There was nothing immediately unusual about her presence, and she remained with the young mother for several hours, offering comfort and support during the early hours after delivery. The woman was actually Gloria Williams. Unknown to Kamiyah, Gloria was experiencing an overwhelming emotional crisis. She had recently suffered a miscarriage, lost custody of her children, and had been living in an abusive relationship. Those events had left her struggling mentally and emotionally. Earlier that day, she had gone to the hospital and stood outside the nursery, looking through the windows at the newborn babies before eventually entering Kamiyah's room. As time passed, Gloria continued presenting herself as a caring nurse. Eventually, she told Kamiyah that it was time to take Kamiyah away briefly so the baby's temperature could be checked. The explanation sounded like a routine medical procedure, giving Kamiyah no immediate reason to question the request. Trusting the woman standing beside her, she allowed Kamiyah to be taken from the room. Instead of bringing the infant for a medical examination, Gloria placed the newborn inside a leather bag. She then walked out of the hospital carrying Kamiyah and left the medical center without being stopped. After leaving Jacksonville, she drove away with the baby. Within a short period, what had begun as a day filled with hope for a teenage mother became the beginning of a devastating kidnapping. Kamiyah's expectation of starting a new chapter with her daughter ended inside the hospital, while Gloria Williams departed with the child she intended to raise as her own. The abduction marked the beginning of a case that would remain unresolved for many years afterward. Gloria returned to her family with a startling explanation for her absence. She claimed that she had unexpectedly gone into labor while at work and had delivered a baby. To those around her, the story appeared convincing enough, leaving few immediate questions about how the child had suddenly entered her life or whether the circumstances surrounding the birth could be verified. At the hospital, however, a completely different reality was unfolding. Kamiyah frantically searched for her newborn daughter after realizing the woman posing as a nurse had vanished with the baby. Hospital staff quickly recognized the seriousness of the situation, and law enforcement was called to begin an urgent investigation into the disappearance. Officers interviewed Kamiyah, medical personnel, and anyone else who might have seen the suspect before she left the facility. Using descriptions provided by Kamiyah and other witnesses, investigators created a facial composite of the woman believed to have taken the infant. The image was distributed in hopes that someone would recognize the suspect and provide information leading to her identification. Detectives pursued available leads, examined witness accounts, and continued searching for evidence that could reveal where the newborn had been taken. Despite those efforts, the investigation failed to produce the breakthrough authorities desperately needed. The kidnapper remained unidentified, and no confirmed information emerged about Kamiyah's location. As weeks became months and months turned into years, the search gradually lost momentum. Without significant new evidence, the case eventually grew cold, leaving investigators with unanswered questions and a family still waiting for answers. The hospital also faced consequences for what had happened within its walls. Following legal action related to the security failures surrounding the kidnapping, University Medical Center reached a settlement with Kamiyah. She received $1.5 million as compensation for the hospital's negligence in connection with the incident. Although the settlement acknowledged institutional responsibility, it could not restore what had been taken. Kamiyah's whereabouts remained unknown, and for the next 18 years, her fate remained one of the most painful, unanswered questions surrounding the case. Leaving investigators and her family without the resolution, they continued seeking despite the passage of time. After taking the infant, Gloria Williams continued building a new life that appeared ordinary from the outside. Over the following years, major changes reshaped her circumstance. She eventually escaped the abusive relationship that had influenced much of her earlier life, regained custody of her other children, remarried, and settled in South Carolina. There, she raised the kidnapped child under a new identity, naming her Alexis Manigo and presenting herself as Alexis's biological mother. Within that household, Alexis experienced what relatives and acquaintances described as a generally happy childhood. She grew up alongside siblings, surrounded by extended family members, classmates, neighbors, and everyday routines that seemed completely typical. School, family gatherings, celebrations, and ordinary childhood experiences helped create a sense of stability. Nothing in her daily life suggested that her identity rested upon a decades-old kidnapping. To everyone around her, including Alexis herself, Gloria was simply her mother, and there appeared to be no reason to question that relationship. As the years passed, Alexis accepted the life she had always known. She had no memory of another family, and no reason to suspect that anything had been hidden from her. The story of her birth and upbringing remained consistent throughout her childhood, allowing her to believe that her place within the family was entirely genuine. Those closest to her also treated that identity as unquestionable, reinforcing the belief that everything about her background was legitimate. That sense of certainty began to change when Alexis reached the age of 16. Like many teenagers, she expected to take the next steps toward greater independence. However, she soon encountered an unexpected obstacle. She discovered that she did not have a social security number, preventing her from obtaining a driver's license or securing employment. What initially appeared to be an administrative problem quickly became something far more significant. The missing documentation raised unavoidable questions about her legal identity and personal history. For the first time, Alexis confronted evidence that something fundamental about her life did not add up. The absence of basic identification could not be easily explained away, and it marked the earliest clear indication that the story she had always believed about herself might not be true. Without realizing it, she had reached the first turning point in uncovering the hidden truth surrounding her identity and her past. Alexis confronted Gloria after growing doubts about her identity became impossible to ignore. Their conversation changed everything. Pressed with questions, Gloria admitted she had kidnapped Alexis as a baby. She suggested surrendering to authorities, acknowledging the truth could no longer remain hidden. Yet, Alexis refused, insisting Gloria was the only mother she had ever known. Despite the shocking confession, years of shared life and emotional attachment made the decision deeply complicated. In January 2017, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 2 anonymous tips, pointing investigators toward Walterboro. The first tip came from someone claiming Alexis had privately confessed the truth. The second originated from an individual who reported overhearing Alexis discussing that Gloria was not her biological mother. Although the callers remained unidentified, both accounts directed investigators toward the same conclusion and provided enough information to justify immediate follow-up. Investigators confronted Gloria with the growing evidence and arranged DNA testing to determine Alexis's true identity. The scientific results removed every remaining doubt. Testing conclusively established that Alexis Manigo was actually Kamiyah Mobley, the infant who had disappeared from a Florida hospital 18 years earlier. The discovery ended one of the longest unanswered child abduction mysteries connected to that hospital case. For nearly 2 decades, Kamiyah's biological family had lived without certainty. While Alexis had grown believing Gloria was her real mother, the DNA findings permanently connected 2 separate lives that had unknowingly followed different paths since infancy. Investigators now possessed definitive proof rather than suspicion, allowing the missing child investigation to reach its long-awaited resolution. The anonymous tips, Gloria's admission, and the laboratory results formed a clear sequence that confirmed what had happened years before. For Alexis, the confirmation created an overwhelming conflict between biological truth and the woman who had raised her every day of her life. For investigators, however, the evidence finally answered the central question surrounding the case. Kamiyah Mobley had been found alive, and the identity she had always known was not the one she was born with. The revelation closed the search while opening an entirely new chapter for everyone whose lives had been shaped by the disappearance, the deception, and the extraordinary discovery. From that moment, the investigation shifted from searching for a missing infant to addressing the legal and emotional consequences revealed by the confirmed identification, ending uncertainty while leaving difficult personal realities impossible to escape for everyone involved. The confirmation that Kamiyah had been found alive transformed years of uncertainty into an entirely different emotional challenge for everyone connected to the case. For Shanera Mobley, the news brought overwhelming relief, but it also reopened years of pain that had never truly disappeared. She explained that although she later became the mother of other children, she never stopped thinking about the daughter taken from her shortly after birth. Every milestone, every birthday, and every passing year carried the unanswered question of where Kamiyah might be and whether she was safe. Learning that her daughter was alive did not instantly restore the relationship that had been stolen nearly 2 decades earlier. When Shanera and Kamiyah finally met, the reunion carried powerful emotions alongside undeniable complications. The years that separated them could not simply disappear with a single meeting. Kamiyah had spent 18 years believing Gloria Williams was her mother because Gloria had raised her throughout her entire life. That bond had shaped Kamiyah's identity, memories, and understanding of family, making the reunion deeply meaningful but also emotionally complex for everyone involved. As the family struggled to process these realities, attention also turned toward the criminal proceedings against Gloria Williams. The legal system now had the responsibility of addressing the kidnapping that had changed multiple lives for nearly 18 years. Investigators had identified Kamiyah, and prosecutors prepared the case based on the evidence surrounding her disappearance and Gloria's actions. While the emotional consequences continued unfolding within both families, the courtroom became the setting where legal accountability would finally be determined after years of unanswered questions. In February 2018, Gloria Williams entered guilty pleas to kidnapping and interfering with custody. Her decision eliminated the need for a lengthy trial, but it did not lessen the significance of the crimes or the lasting damage described throughout the proceedings. The guilty pleas formally acknowledged responsibility for taking Kamiyah and raising her as her own child, bringing the criminal case closer to its conclusion while leaving the emotional consequences unresolved. During the sentencing hearing, Kamiyah Mobley spoke about the profound grief she had experienced since the day her newborn disappeared. She described the lasting emotional wounds created by the kidnapping and explained how the loss continued affecting her life long after the initial search ended. Her statement reflected years of unanswered questions and enduring sorrow that could never be erased, simply because Kamiyah had eventually been found alive. Gloria Williams also addressed the court before sentencing. She expressed remorse for her actions, acknowledging the consequences that followed the decisions she had made. Her statement represented her opportunity to speak directly before the court determined her punishment, but the judge ultimately focused on the seriousness of the offenses and the lasting impact they had created. After considering the case, the judge sentenced Gloria Williams to 18 years in prison. The sentence reflected both the severity of the kidnapping and the extended period during which Kamiyah had remained separated from her biological family. Although the criminal proceedings had reached their legal conclusion, the decision could not undo the years that had already passed or repair every relationship affected by the crime. Even after Gloria's conviction, Kamiyah refused to completely sever her relationship with the woman who had raised her. Despite learning the truth about her biological family, she continued viewing Gloria as an important part of her life because that connection had defined her upbringing for 18 years. The emotional conflict demonstrated that legal judgments and personal relationships often follow very different paths. Years later, Kamiyah revealed that she and Kamiyah were no longer speaking. That heartbreaking reality underscored the enduring consequences of the kidnapping, showing that finding Kamiyah alive did not guarantee a lasting reunion or complete emotional healing. The case ultimately ended with justice delivered through the courts, yet its deepest scars remained within the lives of everyone forever involved together. On the 17th of January 1985, 24-year-old Denise vanished from her home in Raymond, New Hampshire. She had been married, living an ordinary domestic life in the quiet New Hampshire town. That day began like any other, with no indication of the events that would soon unfold. When her husband returned home later that evening, he noticed nothing out of the ordinary at first. The house appeared undisturbed, and there was no immediate sign that anything was wrong. It would take him 6 hours before he discovered something that would change everything: a note pinned to the refrigerator in their kitchen. This delay, the 6 hours between his arrival home and his discovery of the note, would later become a significant detail for investigators examining the case. The note itself would soon reveal that Denise's disappearance was no ordinary absence. But before authorities could piece together what had happened, the basic facts remained stark and simple. A young wife had vanished from her own home, and her husband had unknowingly lived alongside a warning for hours before finding it. The note pinned to the refrigerator became investigators' only starting point when they arrived at the Raymond, New Hampshire home. 4 words, handwritten and unsigned. Read simply, "We've got your wife." There was no signature, no return address, and nothing to indicate who had written it or why. Outside the house, officers found footprints pressed into the snow, leading away from the property. These footprints represented the sole physical evidence recovered at the scene. No fingerprints were found, no signs of forced entry existed, and no witnesses came forward. Investigators searched the surrounding area for any additional trace of Denise, but nothing else was discovered. The absence of a ransom demand troubled detectives from the outset. Kidnappings driven by financial motive typically involve contact within hours or days. Yet no phone call, letter, or message ever followed the note. Whoever had left it made no attempt to negotiate, issue further threats, or explain their intentions. This silence left investigators without a clear direction to pursue. Was the note a genuine threat, a deliberate diversion, or something else entirely? Without further clues, detectives could not determine the identity or motive of its author, and the case stalled almost immediately, leaving Denise's fate entirely unknown. Several days into the investigation, detectives received a break that would deepen the mystery rather than solve it. Denise's husband's pickup truck was discovered at Logan Airport, parked among rows of long-term vehicles left by travelers. Inside the truck, resting on the front seat, investigators found a collection of Denise's personal documents, her social security card, her birth certificate, and her credit cards. The items appeared deliberately placed, yet their presence offered no clear explanation. There was no sign of Denise herself anywhere near the vehicle, and no witnesses came forward who had seen her at the airport. Investigators searched the surrounding area, reviewed what records were available, and considered whether the truck's location pointed to travel plans, but nothing further emerged. No additional evidence surfaced to indicate what had happened to her or where she might have gone next. The discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Rather than providing closure, the truck and its contents became another unresolved piece of a case that continued to defy explanation. Denise's family had always shared a close bond with her. As days turned into weeks with no word from her, that closeness made her silence feel wrong. They strongly suspected that something sinister had taken place, unable to accept that Denise would simply vanish without reaching out to those closest to her. Investigators, meanwhile, turned their attention to her husband, the last person known to have been in contact with her home. Yet, despite the strange circumstances surrounding the note and her disappearance, he was never named a suspect in the case. No evidence tied him to her disappearance in any way. As time passed without answers, the marriage could not withstand the uncertainty. Denise's husband eventually filed for divorce, formally closing that chapter of their life together. For law enforcement, the investigation continued along two possible paths: abduction or death. Both theories remained active, yet neither could be supported by concrete proof, leaving the case unresolved and the family without closure. Several months after Denise vanished from her Raymond home, the investigation took an unexpected turn. The courier service, where she had worked as a bookkeeper, came forward with a serious accusation, claiming Denise had stolen company funds. The amount in question was substantial, with estimates ranging anywhere from $12,000 to as much as $100,000. This accusation introduced an entirely new possibility into the case. Investigators who had been searching for evidence of abduction or violence now had to consider an alternative explanation: that Denise had disappeared voluntarily, fleeing not a kidnapper, but potential legal and financial consequences. By 1986, this theory gained official weight when embezzlement charges were formally filed against her. The note on the fridge, the abandoned truck, the footprints in the snow, all of it now had to be reconsidered in light of this financial motive. For investigators and the public alike, this marked a pivotal shift. What had once appeared to be a case of possible violence now carried the added weight of financial wrongdoing, complicating the search for the truth behind Denise's disappearance. 7 years after the embezzlement charges were first filed against Denise, they were formally dismissed. The allegations that had once painted her as a woman hiding from financial trouble no longer carried legal weight. For her family, this dismissal brought a renewed sense of hope. They believed that with the charges cleared, Denise might finally feel safe enough to come forward and reconnect with them. But that hope was not immediately rewarded. No call came, no letter arrived. The years that followed were marked by silence, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. What had once been an active investigation slowly faded into a cold case, its file left open but untouched. For nearly a decade, Denise's whereabouts remained unknown, and her family was left to wait, wondering if she was alive and if she would ever return. 17 years passed with no confirmed trace of Denise. The case remained unresolved. Her family left with only questions and a fading hope that she was still alive. In 2002, that silence finally broke. A private investigator named Shirley Casey came forward with information that would reignite the investigation. Casey had identified a woman living in Florida who bore a striking resemblance to Denise and, notably, shared her exact date of birth. This detail was too significant to ignore. Casey brought her findings to the attention of authorities, providing them with a lead they had not possessed in nearly 2 decades. For investigators who had long considered the case cold, this tip offered a rare and credible starting point. Law enforcement moved quickly to follow up, treating the Florida connection as the most promising development since Denise's disappearance in 1985. The search for answers was, once again, active. On the 13th of May 2002, the investigation reached its conclusion. Law enforcement located Denise in Panama City, Florida, living under the name Denise James. For 17 years, she had remained completely unknown to her family, her former life left entirely behind. In that time, she had built a new identity for herself and started a family of her own, unaware that the people who loved her had spent nearly 2 decades searching for answers. When authorities finally confronted her, Denise offered an explanation for her disappearance. She confessed that she had fled after her former employer threatened to kill her within 2 days. Fearing for her life, she made the decision to disappear entirely rather than risk that threat being carried out. Denise further revealed the lengths she had gone to in order to avoid being found. In an effort to cover her tracks, she had traveled through the Bahamas, then to California, South Carolina, and finally Hawaii, before eventually settling into her new life in Florida under a different name. With her identity confirmed and her story finally understood, Denise was reunited with her family. After 17 years of uncertainty, grief, and unanswered questions, the reunion was described as deeply emotional. The mystery that had haunted her loved ones for so long was, at last, resolved. John Darwin was born on the 14th of August, 1950, in Hartlepool, a bustling port town in County Durham, England. He grew up in this coastal community, which would later become central to the story of his disappearance. 23 years later, on the 22nd of December, 1973, John married Ann Stevenson in Black Hall. Following their marriage, John pursued a career in education, teaching science and mathematics for 18 years. After nearly 2 decades in the classroom, he made a significant career change, becoming a prison officer. On the surface, John Darwin's life appeared stable and unremarkable, a husband, an educator, and later a civil servant, living quietly in County Durham. On the 21st of March 2002, John Darwin set out on a canoe ride near his home in County Durham. He did not return. As the hours passed, his wife, Anne, grew increasingly uneasy. The routine of the day gave way to worry, then to alarm, as the time he should have been home came and went with no sign of him. She waited, watching the clock, hoping he would walk through the door. He did not. Late that evening, unable to explain his absence any longer, Anne made the call that would set everything in motion. She contacted the police. Word spread quickly to the Coast Guard. Within hours, an expansive search operation was underway along the coastline and waterways John was known to frequent. Officers and rescue teams combed the area through the night and into the following morning, searching for any trace of the missing man, a husband, a teacher, a former prison officer who had simply vanished. The morning after John Darwin failed to return from his canoe trip, searchers made their first discovery. The paddle he had used was found drifting in the water near Seaton Carew. Beyond this single object, there were no other clues. Nothing indicated where John might be or what had happened to him out on the water. 6 weeks passed. Then his canoe was located, damaged, near North Gare. The site sat in a secluded stretch by the River Tees, an area known locally as the Blue Lagoon. Still, no sign of John himself. For Anne Darwin, the months that followed were defined by uncertainty. 6 months of anguish wore her hope down. She said, at that point, that all she wanted was to bury her husband's body. Recovering it, she said, would let her move on. In April of the following year, John Darwin was formally declared dead. The inquest into his disappearance concluded with an open verdict. His death certificate recorded that the sea had claimed his life. With that certificate in hand, Anne Darwin was able to move forward with a series of financial claims. Over time, she accumulated close to £250,000 in payouts. The largest sum, £137,000, came from the insurance company Norwich Union. His prison service pension added £58,000. A separate life insurance policy contributed £25,000. His teacher's pension provided a further £25,000. These payments, drawn from 4 separate sources, would later become central to understanding what had truly happened to John Darwin. Unbeknownst to anyone apart from his wife, John Darwin was alive and well throughout this entire period. Behind the official record of his death lay a man who had spent years moving between careers. from teaching to banking and finally to work as a prison officer, all the while driven by a relentless desire for wealth. His father, Ronald, then 91 years old, later reflected on his son's character, saying John had ideas above his station and big dreams and ambitions, adding that he sometimes thought John was in too much of a hurry to make money. This obsession ran deep. Even at his own mother's funeral, money was reportedly all Darwin could talk about. His pursuit of wealth took several forms. He purchased a number of inexpensive properties in the Durham area, hoping to rent them out. When that failed, he turned to trading stocks, going so far as to install 17 phone lines in his house to manage his trades. That venture also collapsed. In a final attempt to project success, he purchased a 40,000-pound Range Rover. By 2001, his investments had unraveled entirely, and debt collectors began arriving at the couple's home. By 2001, John Darwin was overwhelmed with debt. Too proud to declare bankruptcy and unwilling to accept financial failure, he devised a different solution. He would stage his own death and collect the life insurance money owed to his family. Following his staged disappearance, Darwin did not leave the area. Instead, he went into hiding nearby, frequently returning to the marital home under cover of darkness. During daylight hours, he sheltered in a small, one-room apartment adjacent to his own house, remaining out of sight. To move between this hideout and his family home without detection, Darwin relied on a hidden doorway concealed behind a wardrobe. This passage allowed him to slip in and out unseen and unheard. To further avoid discovery, he poured concrete over the floorboards beneath this route, eliminating any creaking that might give away his presence. Throughout this period, only one person knew the truth. Not even his own children were aware their father was alive. Anne alone carried the secret of his continued existence. As the years passed, Darwin grew bolder in his deception. He began walking outdoors in daylight, wearing nothing but a woolly hat, adopting a hobbling gait to suggest an injury, and obscure his identity from anyone who might recognize him. When visitors arrived unannounced, he disguised himself as Tom the Handyman, wearing an inexpensive wig and glasses. Whenever relatives came to stay in the house, he vanished through the same hidden entrance behind the bedroom wardrobe. Confident his charade had gone undetected, he applied for credit cards under his own name, using the address of his small hideout. Despite these precautions, he was spotted repeatedly. In 2003, he encountered a former prison colleague. Police investigated, but Darwin convinced them the man had mistaken a look-alike cousin for him. On another occasion, a tenant recognized him and asked if he was supposed to be dead. Nervous, Darwin begged the tenant to stay silent, and the tenant reluctantly agreed. Determined to rebuild his identity, Darwin turned to local cemeteries, searching for the grave of a child born around the same time as himself. He found one, applied for a copy of the child's birth certificate, and used it to secure a passport under a false name. With this new identity in hand, he traveled to America in 2004. There, through an online role-playing game, he made contact with Kelly Steele, a mother of 3 from Kansas. Darwin persuaded Kelly to purchase a 20-acre ranch, contributing 25,000 pounds of his own money toward the deal. He told her he had made a fortune trading stocks and claimed he had always dreamed of becoming a cowboy. Shortly after, his manner changed. He began aggressively demanding his money back, sending emails to Kelly that grew increasingly hostile, leaving her genuinely fearing for her personal safety. Darwin's pursuit of wealth continued beyond Britain's borders. He relocated to Panama City, where he established a company of his own. His spending reflected the lifestyle he had long chased: a Toyota Land Cruiser costing 25,000 pounds and a rented flat valued at 50,000 pounds. Funding came from home. 2 properties in Seaton, Carew had been sold for a combined 455,000 pounds. From these proceeds, Darwin committed a further 200,000 pounds toward an estate near the Panama Canal, envisioned as a tourist resort. But the scheme was already fraying. British police had received tips suggesting Darwin remained alive and was living in Panama. On the 14th of July, 2006, the evidence became visible to the public. A photograph surfaced showing Darwin and his wife together, searching for property in Panama. Compounding the danger, Panama introduced new visa regulation. Without his false identity holding any longer, Darwin faced a lengthy verification process he could not survive undetected. With his cover in Panama collapsing, Darwin chose to return to England and construct one final deception: amnesia. On the 1st of December 2007, he walked into a West End Central police station and declared, "I think I am a missing person." He gave his name and date of birth easily, but claimed no memory of the previous 5.5 years. Cleveland Police and the Metropolitan Police launched a joint investigation, and following the earlier Panama photograph, had publicly expressed joy at her husband's survival. But years of witness sightings ultimately disproved his amnesia claim. In 2008, Darwin was convicted on 8 deception charges, receiving 6 years and 3 months, and was separately convicted of fraud and money laundering, sentenced to 6.5 years. Stephen Kubacki, a 3-year-old undergraduate student at Hope College, attended the small Christian college situated along the shores of Lake Michigan. During his time as a student, he decided to take a solo cross-country skiing trip. The excursion was intended to last only 1 or 2 days before he returned to his normal routine. Instead, Stephen disappeared without leaving any explanation, beginning a case that quickly drew the attention of local authorities and search teams. The following day, snowmobilers traveling through Saugatuck came across an unusual sight. A pair of abandoned cross-country skis rested near a backpack, with no sign of their owner anywhere nearby. Recognizing that something was wrong, they contacted law enforcement. Investigators examined the backpack and confirmed that it belonged to Stephen Kubacki. With his belongings located but Stephen himself missing, authorities immediately organized a search and rescue operation focused on the surrounding area. As the search progressed, investigators uncovered additional clues that appeared to trace Stephen's final known movements. Footprints stretched across the snow for approximately 200 yards, leading directly toward the frozen edge of Lake Michigan. The trail ended abruptly at the ice, with no footprints returning toward shore. Search teams also recovered Stephen's skis and ski poles near the beach, reinforcing the belief that he had reached the lake before vanishing. Based on the physical evidence available, investigators concluded that Stephen had most likely walked onto the frozen surface of Lake Michigan, where the ice may have given way beneath him. Without any returning tracks or signs of another route, they believed he had fallen through the ice and drowned beneath the lake's frozen surface. Extensive search efforts followed as rescuers attempted to locate him, but no body was ever recovered. The only evidence left behind consisted of Stephen's abandoned equipment and the footprints that disappeared at the edge of the frozen lake, leaving investigators with no further physical clues to explain what had happened during his solitary skiing trip. The area where Stephen Kubacki disappeared lies within the region commonly known as the Lake Michigan Triangle. This stretch of water extends from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, across to Ludington, Michigan, and down toward Benton Harbor. Although it has never achieved the worldwide recognition of the Bermuda Triangle, the region has earned a long-standing reputation for unexplained disappearances and unusual incidents that have continued attracting attention for decades. One of the earliest examples connected to this area dates back to 1891. That year, the 7-man crew of the schooner Thomas Hume sailed across Lake Michigan in search of lumber. The vessel never returned, and no trace of the ship or its crew was ever found. Over the years, additional reports involving unexplained aviation accidents, ghost ship sightings, mysterious disappearances, and rapidly changing weather conditions have all become associated with this same region, adding to its enduring reputation for mystery. Following Stephen's disappearance, search teams concentrated their efforts around the location where he had last been seen. Investigators carefully examined the shoreline and surrounding area, looking for any evidence that could reveal what had happened after he left on his solo skiing trip. During the search, they recovered Stephen's skis and ski poles near the beach. They also discovered footprints leading toward the frozen surface of Lake Michigan. The tracks continued across the snow until they reached the lake, where they abruptly ended. There were no signs indicating that Stephen had turned back or continued in another visible direction. Despite repeated searches, investigators found nothing else that could explain where he had gone. Most importantly, no trace of Stephen's body was ever recovered. Based solely on the physical evidence available, investigators concluded that Stephen had most likely walked onto the frozen lake, fallen beneath the ice, and drowned. However, because his remains were never located, that conclusion could never be confirmed with certainty. The absence of definitive evidence ensured that Stephen Kubacki's disappearance remained an unresolved case, despite the extensive search efforts conducted after he vanished. On the 5th of May 1979, 14.5 months after Stephen Kubacki disappeared during his solo skiing trip, an unexpected moment brought the case back into public attention. Without any warning, Stephen arrived at his father's house and rang the doorbell. When the door opened, he appeared confused and disoriented, behaving as though he had only recently awakened from a long sleep. After his father embraced him, Stephen struggled to understand why everyone reacted with such emotion. He expressed genuine disbelief when he learned that more than a year had passed since he had vanished. As investigators and reporters sought answers, Stephen explained that his memories of the missing months were almost entirely absent. The little he could recall began with waking up alone in a meadow, nearly 40 miles from his father's home and approximately 700 miles away from Lake Michigan. He had no understanding of how he reached that location or what had happened between his disappearance and that moment. The lengthy gap in his memory remained completely unexplained from his perspective. Stephen also noticed several details that immediately seemed unfamiliar. He was dressed in clothing that he did not recognize, suggesting they were not the clothes he had been wearing before his disappearance. Beside him sat a backpack that did not belong to him. Inside were maps that he had never seen before. None of these items helped him remember where he had been or who might have placed them there. One of the strangest details involved the shirt he was wearing. It was a t-shirt from a Wisconsin marathon, despite Stephen having no memory of participating in such an event. During an interview, he remarked that he felt as though he had done a lot of running, even though no memories accompanied that impression. When asked about the last thing he clearly remembered before everything became blank, Stephen consistently returned to the same image: the snow-covered shores of Lake Michigan. Beyond that point, his recollections ended, leaving the 14.5 months between his disappearance and return without a clear explanation from Stephen himself. As investigators and the public searched for answers, Stephen Kubaki's disappearance continued to resist any clear explanation. The known facts established where he vanished and how he eventually returned, but they did not reveal what happened during the missing 14.5 months. Because of that uncertainty, several explanations emerged over time, each attempting to account for the remarkable gap in his memory without producing a definitive conclusion. Some observers believe Stephen may have entered a coma-like state before wandering across the country with no memory of his actions. Others focused on the location where he disappeared, pointing to the Lake Michigan Triangle and its long-standing reputation for unexplained events. More speculative ideas suggested alien abduction, although those claims remain theories without supporting evidence. None of these possibilities resolved the unanswered questions surrounding his absence, and no explanation gained universal acceptance. Stephen himself consistently stated that he remembered very little about the period after leaving on his skiing trip. During later interviews, he repeated that his last clear memory was near the snow-covered shores of Lake Michigan before everything became blank. He firmly rejected suggestions that he had experienced mental health problems. According to Stephen, nothing in his life before disappearing pointed toward emotional distress or a reason to abandon everything voluntarily. He explained that he was attending school, had a job waiting for him with the Holland Sentinel newspaper, and had recently left behind a romantic relationship in Germany. From his perspective, there had been no significant personal problems before his trip. Although Stephen remained unable to explain the missing months, he offered his own possible interpretation. He believed the memory loss might have resulted from fatigue or overexposure. He agreed to undergo a medical examination, hoping it might provide some insight into his condition. But he refused psychiatric counseling, even after repeated questions from reporters. He maintained that he simply could not remember what had happened. Decades later, Stephen Kubaki's disappearance and unexpected return remain unexplained. The case continues to stand as an enduring mystery, while Stephen himself is reported to be alive and well, according to the available background information. On Saturday, the 18th of September, 1971, 15-year-old Tamara Milograd left home with two of her closest friends to attend the annual Royal Melbourne Show in Melbourne. The exhibition was one of the city's most popular public events, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors every year with a combination of farming, displays, entertainment, food, competitions, and family attractions. Visitors could watch horse racing, sheep shearing, alpaca exhibitions, poultry competitions, log chopping events, and many other activities spread across the busy showgrounds. Before leaving, Tamara spoke with her mother, Rubel, about her plans for the day. Aware that enormous crowds would be gathering at the exhibition, Rubel expressed concern and offered to accompany Tamara and her friends. She wanted to keep an eye on the girls while they enjoyed the event. Tamara, however, strongly opposed the idea. She assured her mother that she and her friends would look after one another and insisted that her mother would not be interested in spending the day watching the games and attractions. After saying goodbye, Tamara climbed into a car with her friends and headed toward what was expected to be an enjoyable day. The group spent time walking through the exhibition and exploring its many attractions together. Everything appeared ordinary until Tamara unexpectedly mentioned that she had run out of change. She told her friends she was going to find a place where she could exchange some money, promising that she would return shortly. she walked away alone. Minutes gradually turned into a much longer absence. As Tamara failed to reappear, concern replaced the excitement of the day. Her friends searched through the surrounding areas of the exhibition, checking places where they thought she might have gone. Despite their efforts, they were unable to locate her. Every unsuccessful search increased their anxiety, and eventually they realized they needed additional help. With no sign of Tamara anywhere on the crowded showgrounds, her friends contacted her family. Her parents rushed to the Royal Melbourne Show and immediately joined the search, hoping they would quickly find their daughter somewhere within the enormous venue. Together, they spent hours looking throughout the exhibition grounds, but every attempt ended the same way. There was still no trace of the 15-year-old. As the search continued without results, it became increasingly clear that Tamara had not simply become separated from her friends in the crowd. After exhausting every immediate effort to locate her, her family recognized the seriousness of the situation. Australian authorities were notified without delay, and an official missing person investigation began. What had started as an ordinary Saturday outing to one of Melbourne's largest annual events had unexpectedly become the beginning of a disappearance that left Tamara Milograd's family searching for answers. While investigators faced the difficult task of determining what had happened after she walked away to exchange her money and never returned, Tamara Milograd's disappearance immediately prompted an extensive police response. After her parents reported that she had vanished from the Royal Melbourne Show, officers broadened their search beyond the exhibition grounds, examining nearby areas where she might have gone. Despite sustained efforts over several days, investigators found no physical evidence explaining how the 15-year-old had disappeared or where she had gone after leaving her friends. The absence of clear clues quickly complicated the investigation and forced detectives to explore every possible avenue available to them. With the initial searches producing no answers, investigators shifted their attention toward Tamara's personal life. Detectives interviewed family members, hoping to understand whether events at home might provide insight into her disappearance. During those conversations, police learned that Tamara had been experiencing a period of adolescent rebellion. Her older brother, Eugene, described her as difficult to manage, suggesting that conflicts within the household had become increasingly challenging before she vanished. Further interviews painted a picture of a teenager struggling with family tensions. Those closest to Tamara explained that she was highly introverted and frequently skipped school. They also described repeated disagreements between her and other members of the family, saying that the relationship could become strained at times. Investigators also learned about an earlier incident in which Tamara climbed out of her bedroom window and remained away from home for several days before eventually returning. That episode demonstrated she had previously left home without warning, making detectives consider whether history had repeated itself. Friends added another important piece to the investigation. They told police that shortly before Tamara disappeared, she had been involved in a heated argument with her family regarding her boyfriend. According to those accounts, the disagreement had deeply affected her. Following the argument, Tamara was reportedly heard speaking about leaving home and beginning a completely new life elsewhere. Those statements became significant because they appeared consistent with the possibility that her disappearance had been planned rather than forced. As investigators assembled these accounts, they carefully evaluated whether Tamara had chosen to leave voluntarily. Her earlier behavior, the tensions within her family, and the comments she reportedly made after the disagreement all contributed to that working theory. Even so, detectives did not treat the matter as resolved. They continued interviewing anyone who might have encountered Tamara after she separated from her friends at the Royal Melbourne Show. Every conversation, every potential witness, and every reported observation was examined in the hope that someone had seen the missing teenager after she disappeared. Although investigators developed an early belief that Tamara may have left of her own free will, they continued searching for reliable information that could establish exactly what happened after she walked away to exchange her money and never returned. At that stage, definitive answers remained completely out of reach for everyone involved. In the weeks and months following Tamara Milograd's disappearance, investigators continued searching for information that might reveal where the 15-year-old had gone. At the same time, her family refused to remain passive, determined to keep her name visible in the hope that someone, somewhere, had seen her after she vanished from the Royal Melbourne Show. To generate new leads, Tamara's family organized a widespread awareness campaign. Printed flyers carrying her photograph and details were distributed throughout streets and shopping centers, appealing to the public for assistance. Every poster represented another opportunity for a witness to come forward with information that could explain her disappearance or point investigators toward her whereabouts. As the campaign continued, police received several witness reports claiming that Tamara had been seen after the day she disappeared. One account suggested she had remained at the Royal Melbourne Show itself, hiding inside the stables for 2 days after going missing. Investigators examined the area and searched for evidence supporting the report. Despite their efforts, they found nothing that confirmed the sighting, and no trace of Tamra was discovered there. Additional reports emerged from other locations around Melbourne. Rumors circulated that Tamara had been working at a bar near the waterfront in St. Kilda. Another claimed sighting came from one of her own friends, who believed she had seen Tamara at a hotel in Laverton. Each report offered another possible explanation, yet none provided investigators with verifiable proof that Tamara was alive or living under those circumstances. These reported sightings, combined with Tamara's previously documented difficulties at home and her earlier comments about wanting to leave and begin a new life, strengthened the investigators' working belief that she might have disappeared voluntarily. Although this theory influenced the direction of the investigation, it still failed to answer the central question of where Tamra actually was. Her family, however, refused to accept that the search should end. Unwilling to abandon hope, they hired a private investigator to continue examining every possible lead. They also traveled personally to each place where Tamra was rumored to have been seen, hoping that one report would finally lead them to their missing daughter. Every destination ended the same way. The reported sightings could not be confirmed, and each promising lead faded without producing answers. As months turned into years, the investigation gradually lost momentum and eventually became a cold case, while Tamra's family continued living without certainty about what had truly happened to her. Even as the investigation produced no definitive answers, the years continued to pass without any confirmed trace of Tamra Milograd. Her parents never abandoned the hope that one day their daughter would return home. Despite the case growing colder with each passing year, they continued living with unanswered questions and the uncertainty surrounding her disappearance. 18 years after Tamra vanished, her father died without ever discovering what had happened to his daughter or learning whether she was still alive. In 2010, Tamra's disappearance received renewed public attention when her story was included as part of Melbourne's Missing Persons Week. Although the campaign highlighted long unsolved cases, it did not immediately produce the breakthrough her family had been waiting for. 5 years later, an unexpected development changed everything. A woman named Karina Russell was browsing the Australian Federal Police Missing Persons website when she came across Tamara's photograph. She was immediately struck by the remarkable resemblance between the missing teenager and her own mother, Pauline Tammy Russell, who had died in a car accident in 1976, while Karina was still very young. Karina already knew there were unanswered questions surrounding her mother's past. She had learned that her parents had never married and that, for reasons she did not fully understand, her mother had been unable to obtain a birth certificate. Those lingering uncertainties encouraged Karina to search for her mother's true identity. As she examined Tamra's profile more closely, she discovered another striking similarity. In addition to their nearly identical appearance, Pauline and Tamra shared the same birthday. Convinced the similarities were too significant to ignore, Karina contacted the National Missing Persons Coordination Center and explained why she believed the missing girl could actually have been her mother. Following Karina Russell's report, investigators contacted Tamra Milograd's surviving relatives to examine the possibility that the missing teenager and Karina's late mother were the same person. A DNA sample was collected from one of Tamra's siblings and submitted for forensic comparison. Specialists at the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine analyzed the genetic material and confirmed that Karina was biologically related to Tamara's family, finally providing the scientific evidence needed to resolve the decades-old mystery. After 44 years of uncertainty, investigators established what had happened to Tamra. She had voluntarily left her former life, relocated elsewhere within Victoria, changed both her name and her reported age, and lived under the identity of Pauline Tammy Russell. During her new life, she became the mother of 2 children before tragically losing her life in a car accident. The findings revealed that Tamra had survived for several years after disappearing from the Royal Melbourne show. At the same time, they confirmed that she had completely severed contact with her biological family and never reached out to them again. For her mother, who was around 90 years old when the truth was finally uncovered, the discovery brought both heartbreak and long-awaited answers after more than 4 decades of uncertainty. Although the outcome could not restore the years that had been lost, it finally brought the investigation to a close. Karina was welcomed into Tamara's biological family, allowing relatives who had unknowingly been separated for decades to meet and share a bittersweet sense of closure together.